thank you for joining us for episode 11 of our Molecule to Medicine series titled Maximizing the Canadian AI Healthcare Ecosystem. My name is Rebecca Wellfley, and I'm the Marketing Communications Specialist at Cyclica and your host for today's webinar. Today, we'll be hearing from two experts in the biotech space who hold decades of cross-sector experience navigating science-based partnerships to enable patient impact locally and globally. In this fireside chat, we will hear from Fanny C., Head of AI and Emerging Technology External Collaborations at Roche Canada, as well as Helen Petropoulos, Senior Partnerships Manager at Cyclica. Just a few housekeeping details and disclaimers. Please ask questions via the chat box. We'll be answering them throughout the webinar. We are not looking to know, are we claiming to be able to solve all of the challenges discussed in this webinar, and all views expressed are personal. This webinar is being recorded and will be available via Cyclica's YouTube channel next week. So without further ado, let's begin the conversation. Helen, the floor is now yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. And thanks, Fanny, for joining us for this M2M. I want to give a little bit of context to our participants, and thanks to those who are having their lunch with us today. Fanny and I know each other for many years now. I'm not sure, at least a decade. We've both worked in the Canadian innovation ecosystem for many years in different roles. And we're both pretty passionate about innovation and about really positively affecting healthcare in Canada. So that's the context, and we just want to chat today and answer some questions. And as Rebecca said, we probably don't have all the answers, but we have a lot of thoughts. So that's what we're going to talk about today, right?
No, absolutely. I'm thrilled to be here. It's just like back in the day where we were sitting at Mars and having these unintended but catalytic discussions about how we were going to bring innovation through to the patient. And, for better or worse, we could sit through a Tim Hortons coffee or a donut and try to figure out the world and how to make a great impact to the patients that are out there without these enabling technologies. So I'm really, really happy to have this discussion with you. I think no matter what organization we go to, no matter what title we hold, there are people like us, as well as people on this call, who are personally driven by this mandate. And no matter what we do, we will always be there for each other in a trusted environment to make these things happen.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks, Fanny. And maybe I'll start to a little bit riffing off of what you just said. Part of the idea to do this M2M was that Cyclica and Roche co-hosted a dinner recently in March, I believe, to bring together different stakeholders in the AI innovation space, Canadians and other, and just give us some impressions of, it was a sort of after work dinner, much more congenial, if that's the right word. Give us some of the themes that came out of that dinner, and we can sort of build off of those.
I think that dinner was a really great way for a number of companies who are passionate about the development, implementation, and deployment of AI in healthcare to get together and to have conversations that were creative and that were personal. It wasn't like we were sitting down in a meeting talking about a very specific question, about a very specific data set, and looking for a very specific output. It was us coming to the table with our personal values, as well as the organizations that we represented, talking about our dreams of the future, and then also what we wanted to do as a sector to elevate each other as a market to make sure that we get this inflection point for care for patients. And so I think there were over 20 companies there representing the startup industry, but also non-governmental organizations that were in innovation. So there were companies like Netramark, Aspect Biosystems, Mars, Admare, University of Toronto, Amplitude, Shakudo, J&J, Recursion, Phenomic, and having over 20 companies get together to really sit down and be creative, be all over a barbecue and talking about our favorite books and our favorite songs. It led to some amazing conversations. And I think a number of bonds that have continued on throughout that, or even past the dinner. So something to be very proud about.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And I really like that idea of, getting together and finding those common threads, even amongst, competitors in some instances. But at the end of the day, we are all really driven by that patient benefit eventually, and by really making innovation happen. One of the themes as well that I think you mentioned was sort of this breaking down barriers or silos, or for whatever we want to call them. And I think that's true for a couple of aspects in our AI world. One is data, which I think we've both thought a lot about in our careers, and it is certainly a critical piece for AI development, and also, the AI tools themselves. So let's kind of dig into let's chat about how we think we can kind of break down those barriers. And I'll riff a little bit off of something you said in one of our earlier conversations, in the sort of, can we do it technically, politically, and all those pieces in our ecosystem? Should we do it in a sort of safe and ethical and responsible manner? And then the how do we do it, and maybe some examples of where it's really worked. And maybe I'll maybe set the stage on this kind of barriers piece with a little bit of again, it's something a little bit from the past. I was talking to somebody quite senior in our kind of ecosystem space, quite well respected, and he articulated something that I've heard from a lot of people, and that I think a lot of us have talked about, that Canada is uniquely positioned to generate a lot of, not just generate, but be able to access a lot of healthcare data for a lot of reasons. One is our public healthcare system. One is our diverse population, which is, a little bit unique in the world, I would say. And also our very, very strong research capacity. So putting all these pieces together, there's a lot of data out there: clinical data, research data, genetic data, imaging data, clinical trials data. I mean, there's so much data out there, but there's the but. The challenge is they sort of sit in different, they're not yet as connected as maybe we would need them to be to really move research forward, both in the AI space and just generally. So kind of maybe I'll start with your thoughts on this, and then we can sort of dig into the, can we even break down these barriers?
I think it's a really great question. And I think it does come down to breaking down silos. It's a theme that we hear, I don't know, for the last 10 years. Healthcare itself is a team sport. In order to raise an innovation from concept to proof of concept to scale to full deployment, either locally or globally, you need a diverse perspective. In order to make that happen, you need people who are patients, clinicians, developers, policy people, reimbursement. And then within those disciplines, even further subdivided, let's say across the science, you need data scientists, you need biologists, you need physicists, you need material scientists. So it is very much a coordinated effort in order to reach a successful stage such that you're able to create patient impact. And so when we look at artificial intelligence, we're kind of at that stage where it's an emerging innovation. So not only does it have the complexity of bringing a innovation to market, but also the complexity of a new type of innovation that has never been implemented as wide scale as we've seen others in healthcare. And so, at Roche, we have an initiative called AI with Roche, where we bring collaborations together and we work together across common tables to solve big challenges in healthcare. We've done this in COVID, we've done it in ALS, and we're also doing this in rare conditions. And the goal is that we bring open data into the world and we convene these different stakeholders, which include startup companies, multinationals, but then our beloved pan-Canadian AI institutes such as Amy, Mila, and Vector to the table, as well as those gaining insight from unconventional locations such as, South America or Africa. And it is still my belief that there is this 15-year-old kid sitting in their garage that's smarter than all of us and can solve the problems that we're having problem solving. So we see the problem. We're doing our best to break down those silos so that we all elevate each other in this very open environment through responsible collaboration where everything is equitable. People have open access to the data, to the expertise and the tools. And these tools can be leveraged anywhere around the world to further enhance equitable access to care. So doing our best to break down those silos. I think data in itself is particularly interesting in Canada because we do have a wealth of these different repositories. And it's up to us to try and figure out how to use them against one another. And I think, and I don't know if this is, somewhat provocative, but I don't actually think everything needs to be interoperable. I know it's a subject that we've been talking about since forever, but I mean, just because an apple is not compared to an apple doesn't mean that it's not valuable. An apple can be compared to an orange, it's all still fruit. And we can make some gross decisions based on this type of data. And so, I think there's lots of potential to be had. And then I also saw a hand go up. I saw Dennis, our friend. Hi, Dennis.
Hi, Dennis.
I don't know if maybe we'll talk to those questions now or later with whatever is more suitable.
Yeah, we can take a couple questions now, and then we can go into I really like what you said about, some data maybe needs to be put together, but maybe some data can stay in its, I don't want to say silo, it can stay in its place and still be very useful. Okay, so, we'll start with Dennis's question. Take some learnings from a company like 23andMe.
Yeah.
They seem to have engaged a client group and the company shares information. So what is sort of this is like really goes into sort of later stage, but how do we maybe build a model where we're opting in individuals into the workflow?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question because we actually have existing relationships with patient advocacy groups. I don't know if the patient advocacy groups always amaze me with their passion and their purpose, but they have also become technically savvy. And what I can say is that we're working with two groups called Answer ALS, Everything ALS, as well as Rare X, which have technology-based platforms which allow patients to proactively consent to share their data to open science. The data is fully transparent. Everyone has the ability to opt in or opt out. The goal is to allow patients to have a place to put their data if they want to make decisions on their own health or potentially want to share that data with their care providers. So there are avenues to do that. We are continuing to work and collaborate with these groups. And also our hope is to bring scientists closer to patients so that as scientists discover, they're able to further talk to these patient groups and say, I think I see a signal in your diet. Maybe I could ask you some more questions about that to accelerate the research, to accelerate discovery, and to learn more about the condition so we can get to better treatments and better tests faster.
I think that's amazing. And that's really an example of breaking down a silo right there. That's fantastic. I'll go to the third question and then back into the middle, because somebody asked if you're using, I think this is with regards to the ALS challenge that you spoke of, or maybe all of your challenges. Are you using Canadian data, and are there any restrictions to use this clinical data in Canada?
There was in some of our initiatives, like I'd say for the COVID data, we did use Canadian data, but we also used global data. So we had two sets of data. We had population level data, a lot of those open data sets that flooded the market when COVID happened. We worked with Think DataWorks to aggregate, curate them, and make them ready for analysis. And then we also had a symptom tracker that we deployed locally. So that was Canadian data. For ALS, we mainly work with an organization that's in the States. So Answer ALS is the consortium of the Gladstone, Johns Hopkins, MIT, and a number of other academic institutions. So more American or US data than Canadian data. And then for the rare condition data, that is a global platform. So that data comes from everywhere, but the group is housed in the US.
Cool. Awesome. And I'll just take one more question, then we'll go to our next kind of theme. Hi, Allison. Do you think that there will be more barriers because of recent negative attitudes about AI? Not her negative attitudes, I will point out, in the public. So, understanding the technology is hard. And, we were going to talk about this maybe at the end, but we'll touch on it now. Like, do you think some of the aspects that are coming out now in AI, how do you think that'll affect AI in healthcare more particularly? Is it a challenge? Is it an opportunity? Is it both?
It's such a good question. And I'm so glad that was brought up. I think people forget sometimes that technology and data are neutral. There are tools in the world that don't have a need to be evil or a need to be good. It is the way that we actually apply these technologies and that data that actually leads to either a positive or negative outcome. And so I think it comes down to education. Like, as I talk to people who read all the wealth of information that ends up in the media, I feel like there are a lot of myths that need to be busted in order for us to get to a place of what is actually possible versus what is possible in, let's say, a movie. We can define those things and figure out where the state of the science is so we can deploy the most effective technologies at scale, and then are able to very specifically address applications where this is a fit for purpose technology. So AI can't do everything, but there are some things that it can do in healthcare, like triage, or to help augment diagnosis, that have proven benefit. So I think we just need to be very clear about what it can and cannot do, and not solely rely on what we see in the media.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe that takes us into our next theme. And don't worry, we'll pause again for questions after a little bit of discussion here, because our next sort of bucket that we're going to talk about in terms of overcoming barriers was this sort of can we do it from a data perspective? Can we do it from an AI perspective? And let me pull on this thread a little bit more because of Allison's question. What do you think are the main barriers to AI tool adoption in healthcare? Like, is it really that trust, is it, level of validation? Is it like trust building? Is it sort of turning a black box into a white box? I think people maybe hate that wording, but what do you think, what is sort of being in this space? What do you think are the barriers, and can we technically and more broadly fix those or address those, let's say?
I think that's another really good question. I think one of the main barriers is that it's an emerging technology, so people don't know what it can or cannot do. So just in what I had said, it's just educating the general public, potential users, and companies on the state of the science and where it has the ability to potentially provide benefit to patients in the clinic. I think that scope needs to be made very clear to everyone. And I think that state changes with time, but to have forums or tables where we can actually get together and say, okay, this is possible. Let's try and scale for this application, but these other applications, let's hold off a little bit because we're not quite sure. And then there's the whole trustworthiness of the solution itself. It's can we build it in a way where we are able to provide enough trust with our potential customers that it will do what it is intended to do for the population it will be applied to. And I think that's often, like, it's easier said than done, because there are questions that customers now have to ask that have never had to been asked before when a solution is static. It's not like implementing like an MS Office where everything sort of remains the same and
Right.
it doesn't change. Whereas, if your population changes, then the performance of whatever AI solution you're working with may change. So it's the ability for us to build these solutions such that they're generalizable and translatable to an environment. But then also there's this ability of the customer themselves to increase in their capabilities to actually operate that type of algorithm, because it isn't static. So they will have to monitor these types of things, whether or not the population characteristics change, whether or not, they have the IT infrastructure to actually house these capabilities, whether or not they potentially would want to continue, having these sort of more late stage research and development relationships with the vendor itself to help even further improve the algorithm for wide scale usage. So in the end, without sounding too drawn out, buyers don't know how to buy, sellers don't know how to sell, and we have to figure out what that looks like. I think an important concept layered on top of that is humanizing the technology. I think when you apply a technology in different arenas, it doesn't necessarily have to be as humanized as when you actually apply it to healthcare.
Right.
So this is not a can we do it? Let's say everything is technically sound and we've, said that this algorithm is able to diagnose women between the ages of 20 and 40 on whether or not they have breast cancer. But whether or not it can do that across all ethnicities. Let's say it can only do that with one specific ethnicity. As a company, we have to decide whether or not we would stand by or scale or productize something like that. It works, but only for a certain type of population. And these are the questions that we talk about, because, we want to contribute to equitable healthcare. And those algorithms, if not thought in entirety with a suite of algorithms, may not, be adding to that effect. So I think responsible AI is a very key attribute to scaling AI innovation. It addresses the gap in making artificial intelligence systems more transparent, more reliable, more interpretable, so that organizations can address societal issues such as bias, legal compliance, and ethics. And that's why we need to take that into account.
Yeah, for sure. We'll delve into that a little bit more. And I think I love what you said there, because it brings in sort of our overarching concept of the ecosystem. And everybody has to be in it together. Like the tech developers, the end users, the clinicians, the patients, the regulators, the policymakers. It really takes the entire ecosystem, moving the technology forward to get there. Before we go to that sort of, I wanted to talk maybe humor me a little bit, because I'm maybe slightly obsessed with this. Like, we can get more out of our research data. It's like, what, in terms of the can we and data, I mean, let's delve a little bit more into, how can we get more out of this rich data that we have in Canada, the clinical data in our, provincial, let's say, healthcare and national/provincial healthcare system, in all of these databases across, these amazing institutions, all this different data. Like, how there's just a wealth of data out there that could be so valuable for research and for AI technology. And, how do we make the best of that? I think we're doing it to some extent, but I think a lot of people will agree that there's more that can be done. What do you think about that?
I think more can definitely be done. I think for a lot of our initial discussions over the last 5 to 10 years, it's really been about accessing data. It's really been about talking to different organizations and trying to figure out bridges. And I think, remember, there was like a trend around data lakes, and now there's more about, federated types of schemas for data. I think at times people aren't as incentivized or aren't as excited, or they don't necessarily feel the urgency, because we don't always talk about the value of that data. We don't talk about what happens after you share, or maybe we don't talk about the stories of all those benefits as much as we should, because when people start to see the value of bringing all of this data together, they are more inclined to be like, okay, we do need to do this. This is going to help the system, and it isn't for some maybe nefarious thing that people think you could do with that data. So I think it's up to us to tell more of the good news stories and to show that this data can be shared within the environments, within open environments, and it could, and the outputs be used to help with patient decision-making, system changes, and also our policies around it. So we have to focus on the value of what it brings, and I think the incentivization will end up coming out. But we had a discussion about this earlier, and maybe it's a good time to bring it up, but we were talking about incentivization. It's really tough at times because everyone's trying to be the first, right? Everyone's trying to be the first to publish. They're trying to be the first to create a patent. And that is both in the public and private sector. So when you're trying to be the first, it's not necessarily conducive to sharing. And I think we need to come to the table and try to restructure some of that incentivization so we can get to the value of what that data will bring.
Yeah, I fully agree with you there. I think that's great. I think it's a big challenge, but I think it's not insurmountable. I mean, I think where there's a will, there's a way. And we're starting to see some of these sort of, federated data networks happening. The digital supercluster is an example. There's other sort of large data. I'm not going to be able to name everything going on in Canada for sure. So I apologize for not shouting out everyone. But I would say too, the Pan-Canadian AI strategy, part of it is sort of building the capacity to get people together to move from, research all the way to commercialization. So, and there's certainly other efforts. So, and on the funding side as well. So I think a lot of the stakeholders are starting to try and address this, but I think the incentivization, it's going to be interesting. I mean, the other aspect is, looking at what others have done. A lot of people always point to the UK Biobank because they somehow did manage to incentivize a lot of researchers and stakeholders to sort of put data together. Maybe the same thing of them, though, if they can tell their success stories even better, maybe it can help spread the word, further afield. So, but there are some examples, and there is some movement in Canada, which is fantastic.
I agree. And I think it's like, having an organization like Roche to try and be that communication channel between a number of different countries and geographies and organizations can help bring best practices from Canada to other countries, but also bring some of those best practices into Canada. And so that's part of what we're trying to do in partnering with all of the different health systems across the world.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Maybe we'll shout out the AAIH here too, because they're really trying to be that convener for AI technology globally. And Cyclica and Roche are part of that effort, that really global effort. But it's great that there's Canadians, like firmly. Our CEO is the chair of the board, I believe, currently. So it's, there is a Canadian voice in that sort of advocacy group, which is fantastic. Maybe we'll break here. Before we get into the sort of should we kind of aspects in terms of equity in that piece, maybe I'll just check and see if we have any more questions. Oh boy, I'm not sure I understand this question. So when AI solves a pattern or problem,
Mhm,
the algorithms don't show how they got to the solution.
mhm.
Are there ways we can make the AI problem solving more transparent? Okay, so this is a little bit, maybe now that I've read it out loud, this is a little bit about how to turn the black box into kind of the white box. How do we maybe be able to explain and educate really what's happening?
Yeah, I think it's the question that everybody keeps talking about, right? So we get into interpretability or explainability. And I think when we look at these models, we do ask the questions about feature engineering. We do ask the questions about what were the different variables that ended up influencing the outcome of that particular algorithm. It's a little bit tough sometimes because when we're working with third parties, it's part of their IP. We can't necessarily get everything that we need, but we do need some level of assurance that whatever this particular technology will be applied to can be related to those variables that were chosen in the model. And so we have this discussion about where correlation is okay and where cause and effect is required. And I think that differs depending on what you actually apply it for. So, some people think with certain biomarkers, it's like, hey, it's a biomarker, it's just a signal. We don't necessarily need to know that it is actually affecting that specific pathway, but it is helping us to determine whether or not this person needs to go see a doctor. That may be okay, right? But let's say in drug discovery, where you may need to know a little bit more about the pathway itself, and you're trying to understand a little bit more of the details of the biology, interpretability becomes a little bit more of a higher need in those use cases. So I think it comes down to what you're going to apply it to.
Yeah, and I think I've heard that said a lot too, that it really depends on the use case and picking the right use cases and picking the right approach to each. So it seems this is kind of the general, I guess, approach to solving this challenge. Okay, let's go to the next bucket because you already touched on it, which, say we can do a lot of the data access. We can get we can access the data, can build the tool. Now the question we might ask ourselves is should we? So this is the sort of how do we make sure that data and technology is accessible, that it, as you said, that we are representing the right populations. I mean, I was doing a little bit of reading before our call, and we're making progress, but I think the general, like in clinical trials anyway, the general perspective is that we're still not showing the right sort of gender, ethnicity, race balance that needs to be there. And also this sort of correlation between the populations that get the diseases. Are we testing in those right populations? It's interesting. You talked about sort of women in different age groups. And I was reading an article about women over 65 having a really high prevalence of cardiovascular disease. And yet they make up a very, very small percentage in terms of age and gender in those clinical trials. So the data, say we can access the data, but how do we make sure that it's, representative, diverse enough, and not biased? This is a biggie. How do we kind of approach this?
Well, the answer, no, I don't have the perfect answer.
Nobody has that answer. If we had that answer, we would be, yeah.
But I do like the call out, right? There has to be an awareness that we need more diversity in our scientific research and in our clinical trials, right? So when we look at the statistics, I remember I was reading this article and they were saying they were doing like a review, I think, of about 1,400 studies that were looking at either drug development or med device development, covering about 300,000 people. And they were saying, of the women who had cardiovascular disease, there were, of the people with cardiovascular disease, 49% of them were women, but in clinical trials, they only showed up as 41% of that study. And equally so with cancer, lung cancer is the #1 killer for women. And also, they represent 51% of the cancer population, yet they're only represented in clinical trials by 41%. And then this is also a biggie. Of all psychiatric patients, women represent 60% and are only represented in 40% of the study. So this becomes even more of an issue because for an AI algorithm to be affected, it must represent the population or be trained on the population in which it is applied to. So we have to be even more cognizant of the diversity of data we need to collect, or if we're unable to collect it or augment our existing trials or research studies, be able to quantify its effect on the overall algorithm. So I think it just highlights things that need to be fixed and, creates even more urgency if we want to get to the promised land that is, an AI-enabled healthcare system.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I'll go back to sort of the ecosystem there where it's everybody has to work together to try to make this more diverse. It starts with the researchers and the clinicians that are putting together the data sets, whether it's like a massive genomics database or a clinical trial. I mean, it starts with those researchers and clinicians. I've actually, from my old life in the genome enterprise, there's been, we saw in the last number of years, really a lot more, I don't know what the right word is. I'm going to say scrutiny, but that's not the right word, but really asking the applicants, like, how are you going to make sure that your populations are diverse? Like, if you're going to sequence 1,000 genomes, how are you going to make sure that they are, a diverse and a thoughtful set of patients? And I think, so, the funders have to be on board, the researchers and clinicians have to be on board, the patients themselves have to be on board. I mean, I have not been involved myself in clinical trials, but, you have to recruit the patients, and I'm sure there's a lot of complex aspects to that. So again, it really is, we need that whole ecosystem to work together to make sure that the data is diverse and equitable across everyone. I think, we talked about women, but I mean, it's probably even worse when we look at sort of ethnicities. And so it's something that's really important. But I think if we go back to our beginning premise that everybody does want to positively affect patient care, the best way to do that is to make sure that the data is really diverse and equitably available. I'm going to ask actually one of my questions that I in case we didn't have questions, which isn't the case, but I did have a question for you.
Yeah.
So what do you think about synthetic data? Do you think that can help solve some of this diversity sort of aspect? Like, can we use, I mean, it's really interesting to use AI to generate data to then be used by AI algorithms in a more effective way, I guess.
It's a good topic that I think really depends on the use case. I think for a lot of the time, when we talk about synthetic data, it's to address a number of privacy and security risks.
Right.
I think it's also being used to potentially help augment data sets where there is not enough population level data. I also think it's being used to address things like missing data. So I think there are opportunities for synthetic data in helping us get to some accurate or effective AI models. I just think it's not the perfect answer. I think it depends on the specific case. And could we potentially create data sets that would help with the diversity of a data set? I think we could. And I think those are the types of circles that we would want to continue the conversation about. And so, yeah, but we have to be specific about what we apply it to prevent any change in any of the statistical characteristics of the population.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of comes back to, you know, the quality of the data has to be high in any case. And I mean, you've sort of brought back sort of the specificity of the use cases, which I think is great. And I'll also pull on a question here from Allison, and it's great. It's great to shout out that, you know, another piece of our ecosystem that we haven't talked too much about is the social scientists, because we really have a lot of strength in that area in Canada, and they're really thinking a lot about these issues. And you know, Allison brings up the fit for purpose term. Yeah. You know, what do you think?
I would love to be a social scientist in this era right now. It would be the most interesting career, like even to look at data and technology across pre-pandemic, pandemic, and post-pandemic lines. I think we're seeing such huge inflection points when it comes to the collection of data, as well as the acceleration of technology that's not hypothetical, but is actually reaching the market. So for a social scientist to be able to help us figure this out, I think it's a huge undertaking, but also much needed in trying to figure out where we can do the best for society without, you know, creating benefit in one part of the pipeline while causing massive chaos across, you know, the other spectrums of our society. So yeah, no, I would love to engage them within scientific circles. I think they would be the best ones to consult and to advise.
Yeah, I think and that's really happening. I mean, I think there is more, at least in the academic sphere, there is a lot more collaboration between I'm going to misspeak here, but sort of the technical research and the social science research. I mean, they have to go hand in hand. And I think, you know, some of these bigger initiatives that we're talking about, you know, they should be including that social scientist piece and that policy and ethical piece as well. And I'm glad you mentioned COVID, because you know, we've talked about we've talked about should we, kind of want to talk a little bit about how do we, and I think, you know, you mentioned COVID there, and COVID in a way was like a real world kind of crash course in, okay, you know, the world is in this dire situation. How do we all come together to really try to positively affect, you know, healthcare and patient care? So what were some of the lessons learned, you think, from that? I mean, the ecosystem was forced to come together, and some of the barriers maybe came down because of the need. So what are some of those really lessons learned that we want to kind of shout out here, because there's maybe something that we should think about taking forward into other areas?
I think COVID took the world by storm because everyone thought that they were in a Netflix show, and they couldn't believe that this was their life. And I remember in April 2020, a number of us just got on the phone saying, like, what are we going to do? Like, this can't be real. You know, it wasn't about our titles. It wasn't about our organization. It wasn't about our strategic objectives. It was about, what are we going to do so this goes away and we could all, you know, put our suits back on and go back to the office. I think during that time, you know, people would come in and say, I don't know the answer. It was the best kind of creative atmosphere. It was like, I don't know the answer, but let's try and figure this out together. So people would say, hey, I have 6 data scientists, or oh, I have 5 clinicians. Oh, I have infrastructure. Oh, I have, you know, a policy team. And we all got together in this big consortium called the Roche Data Science Coalition. And we gathered all the data in the world that was in the open environment and made it available to scientists. And we were able to create or generate capacity management solutions in the form of dashboards, insights, advanced analytics, AI solutions. And within 8 weeks, we advanced those insights to pandemic task forces across the world through a Roche affiliate network. And we're able to help governments in informing them how to practice social distancing during Ramadan in Pakistan, or reopening practices in Algeria, or testing strategies in Europe. And that was essentially, that was the reason we created the AI Center of Excellence, or AI with Roche, with collaborators that are the Vector Institute, Mila and Amy, because we were like, why do we have to wait for a pandemic when we know if we all swim in the same direction for just a little bit, we can have amazing things happen. And that's what we did in ALS, generating targets and diagnostic biomarkers in 8 weeks. And that's what we're going to be doing in rare conditions. So the pandemic was super scary. And, you know, we all hope that the worst is over, but we now know that being able to come together with that spirit and that ability to problem solve together can make amazing things happen. So I'm kind of glad it happened a little bit.
I mean, I think it was amazing to see, being part of the innovation ecosystem. I would say that almost every company or researcher to some extent pivoted to try and solve this problem. You know, I think it was unprecedented, really. And you know, that sort of piece that you talked about everybody wanting to be first. I mean, everybody just wanted to find an answer to help. Like the first didn't almost even matter anymore. It was like, let's just get out of this, which was quite, you know, maybe a silver lining to, you know, something horrible. I mean, you know, Cyclica as well made our technologies available to researchers. We had a really great collaboration with U of T and the Vector Institute at that time, focused on COVID. And so, you know, the community really came together. I mean, there was one piece that I want you to talk about a little bit in terms of the sort of pathway was revealed, you know, like, you know, I think maybe because of the real world experience, there was this kind of lesson learned about, okay, get a bunch of collaborators together, but then really, how are they interacting? Like, how do you make sure that this person is getting this data at the right time, and then doing whatever they need to do with it to take to the next, and so forth, to really get to an endpoint together? Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I think it's a really good component to discuss, because I think that's the greatest lesson that we learned. It was, not only is it important to bring different stakeholders together who were able to problem solve across the public and private sector, but it was actually the coordination of effort. It was having people understand who was upstream and downstream to them, so they knew where they would go in terms of getting to that endpoint deliverable. So we had people who were responsible for data aggregation and curation. We had people who were responsible for the analytics. We had people that were responsible for the knowledge mobilization. And putting all of those pieces together allowed everyone to work more effectively and efficiently with one another in terms of creating a pipeline. And I feel like at times that is the secret sauce. That is actually the inflection point. And it's pretty neat to see, because at the end of the day, everybody wants to help. Everybody wants to help. They just don't always know where and when. And when you define the where and when, there's a calm and everyone's like, I got this. Okay, we can do this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. And it really speaks to how do we best mobilize all the pieces in our ecosystem to really solve the problem. I mean, I think I keep saying the same thing, but I think it really just, it is a reality that we have a lot of what we need right here in Canada, of course, with international reach as well. But, you know, there's a lot of expertise, data, all the pieces in place. If we can put them into that pipeline, wow, like the impact that we could make would be, I would say, even more than what we've already done. I'll take a very, very short question here from Sasha from U of T. We did the collaboration through COVID was with Bo Wang's lab. And I'll just say generally, we're interested always to explore collaborations with academics, including at U of T and other research institutes. And there's also, in terms of COVID, there's now a big sort of biomanufacturing preparedness effort happening. There's 5 hubs across the country. There's a hub at U of T called High Cubed. We're a partner there, and there's a lot of will, again, for different types of researchers, different types of companies, different types of stakeholders to come together to be ready for, I hope in our lifetime there is not another pandemic, but if there is, the point is let's be more ready. So let's see, we're almost at time here. I want to ask you, Fanny, before we have to go, what are you kind of excited about in terms of healthcare and AI? And I'll give I think we talked about this a little bit. I was talking to a friend who's in the imaging space just about a week ago, and he was telling me, these MRIs and CTs, they're gathering the information and then using machine learning to give the clinician and the technician more information. And wow, what power. We're already there. We're sitting in the MRI machine, and now the MRI machine is smarter. It's gathering the data, it's analyzing the data, and eventually more and more of this happening is going to provide even more data to help, augment how that clinician makes decisions. And I just thought that was so cool. And there's probably a million examples like that. Certainly the drug discovery example at Cyclica is another one, but there's so many examples. Like, what kind of makes you really excited? Where do you think some of our real kind of opportunity areas are in the healthcare and AI space?
I think clinical decision support and precision medicine is really at the forefront of those discussions. So as you know, and COVID has definitely exacerbated this, but the workforce is burnt out. There are massive waiting lines in various conditions, and our ability to triage quickly to the appropriate line is going to make the difference for people. And so when I think of AI, I think about these amazing algorithms that will potentially be able to triage people into the appropriate line. So if I know that, let's say for pediatric neuroradiology, there's probably only 1 or 2 in the country. And so when you have an MRI machine that has the ability to triage, you need to see this patient in the next 5 hours. You need to see this patient in the next 24, and this one you can leave for another 2 to 4 days. That is a make or break in terms of somebody being able to get to their patient in the appropriate time for them to be healthy. So I'm really excited about those augmented decision tools that can work in the background and that could work alongside clinicians in making decisions. And then I'm also, of course, very excited about creating these subpopulations. And, Nahid and Cyclica, we talk about polypharmacy all the time. It's like, can we break down conditions into smaller buckets where it's not just, ALS or MS or Parkinson's, but it's down to the biological pathway. And then can we then use polypharmacy to treat those patients in that manner with this new sort of computerized and data-driven medicine? So that's what I hope for, and that's what we're striving for.
Yeah, I think that's great. I did an industry postdoc in pharma many years ago. I won't say how many, but the tagline back then was, the right drug for the right patient at the right time. Mm-hmm. And it's really exciting to see now that, through AI and other innovations, we can get there. We could really get there. So that's pretty amazing and cool to see. Maybe I don't know, Rebecca can ask Fanny one more question. I'm going to anyway. Even more philosophical than the last, and then maybe I'll go to the Q&As because I haven't been there in a while. But I mean, I think, well, I know that AI is having like a moment right now. I mean, I don't know how, when I joined Cyclica, people thought it was really cool, my family and friends. And then when ChatGPT hit, then everybody was even more interested in AI and everybody's talking about it. I mean, it's on the lips of like, everywhere you go, somebody is asking about this or talking about that. And, I think this creates, a little bit of, challenges and opportunities, like having this kind of, AI is having this massive moment. Like, how do you think we can, and this is like maybe the hardest question, let's try to answer it, is like, how can we capitalize or leverage this moment to really move AI and healthcare forward? Like, is there something, can we use this to really try and help break down some of the barriers in healthcare more specifically?
When I think about open models like ChatGPT or analogs of it, I think about the world being exposed to the biggest POC that it's ever seen, right? It's like you're putting the technology in the hands of potential consumers that are not your consumers yet, but potential consumers that are using it for different applications. And I think, you're going to end up with a population of applications, ones that are very useful, ones that are not very useful. But if we can somehow be able to bring to light the ones that are the most impactful and useful in the healthcare system, that's where we could all focus our resources and energy and really bringing those to the market in a scalable fashion. So I would love to see that. I don't know how that's going to be done. I'm sure, OpenAI, Microsoft have some good ideas about how they're going to do that, but I would love to see a player do that in healthcare for sure.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, do you think that just listening to your answer there, do you think that people kind of using AI and maybe kind of breaking down the sort of barrier of it, that might make them even more apt to, adoption in other areas? I mean, do you think, maybe even with the challenges of these different tools, when somebody can use something themselves, maybe it makes it it demystifies, maybe it makes that kind of, next step of using it in healthcare and using it, their doctors using it and it being involved in drug development and diagnosis and all those pieces. Do these tools kind of help demystify or help? I just, maybe this is a hope in my, very, very optimistic opinion that maybe this can kind of help with adoption, later on of these more, specific tools.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you're able to handle it, touch it, navigate it yourself, it becomes less scary. And you can ask questions to others around you who are using it. So you almost have like a community of people that you can relate to and discuss it with and problem solve with. So I absolutely think it has added to demystifying, but also removing some of the adoption barrier to some of the ones that we think are promising in healthcare, for sure.
That's awesome. Okay, so Rebecca's come back on, so I think we're out of time, but I want to take one more second to thank you, Fanny. It's been amazing chatting with you. I love these discussions. We'll continue to have them going forward, whether, in the Mars, Tim Hortons line or in these kind of aspects. And I will honestly say, part of the reason that I love working in this ecosystem is there are so many, smart, thoughtful, passionate people just like you that are really driving towards that true patient impact. So it's been a pleasure, and thanks for being part of our M2M series and for taking the time with us today. It's been fantastic.
My pleasure. It's always great to work with the Cyclica team, yourself, Jennifer, Rebecca, Nahid. We all have the same values. We all want the same thing. So it was very much a pleasure.
Awesome.
Oh, thanks, ladies. On that note, also thanks to everyone for attending. A recording of this webinar will be available on Cyclica's YouTube channel next week, and also be sure to follow Cyclica on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.